A reading from Scripture, from Psalm 18. From on high, God reached down and grabbed me. He took me out of all that water. God saved me from my powerful enemy. He saved me from my foes, who were too much for me. They came at me on the very day of my distress, but the Lord was my support. God brought me out to wide open spaces. God pulled me safe out because God is pleased with me. And from Genesis, the 2nd chapter. On the 6th day, God completed all the work God had done. And on the 7th day, God rested from all the work that God had done. God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all the work of creation. This is the account of heavens and the earth when they were created.
Thanks, Pastor Bill. Well, good morning. I'm Pastor Julie Greibel. We are happy to have you here worshiping together with us this morning. I am really excited because today we are starting a new sermon series on Sabbath. I don't know, it's hard to find Sabbath in this busy world that we live in. And I have to admit that part of my excitement is that I'm preaching to myself in the sermon series. So hopefully together we can understand more fully what Sabbath is and how we engage in Sabbath time so that it's a blessing in our lives. So I'm just getting back from vacation, our family, and I have to admit the time that we had off wasn't at all Sabbath. I had an entire list of things that I wanted to get accomplished on vacation. Right, Bill and I are converting a van to a camper van, and so our plan was to take vacation to work on the van. And so there was very little rest in the time off. And the reality is, though, that even when we're not in the middle of a pandemic and we go somewhere on vacation, right, our plan actually this summer was to go to Europe on vacation, and we were going to hit like 3 countries in, 10 days or something, right? We are like on the go all the time. And I often joke that we are like type A vacationers, right? We often return and we think, well, now we need a vacation from our vacation. And I imagine some of you have felt the same way at times. When you've returned from vacation and you don't feel rested at all. In fact, maybe you feel more tired than even when you went on vacation in the first place, right? Even though we're taking sort of this break from our normal routines and work, we're still overscheduled. And our lives are even with that time off, not feeling like we've regained the rest that we need, or at least the kind of rest that God is calling us to when God gives us the Sabbath. And so the result is we're left feeling tired all the time. I mean, how often has someone asked you, how are you doing? And your answer has been, I'm tired. And it's not the kind of tired that like taking a nap is going to solve, or having a day off is going to solve, or even having a week-long vacation is going to fix. Ultimately, it's the kind of tired that is a spiritual issue. And so in order to find rest, we sometimes need God to just reach down and grab us out of the situation, right? Sometimes our foe, as in the psalm that Bill read to us, is really our busyness. And we need God to reach down and grab us out of that busyness so that we might have rest. So what does God say about Sabbath? Well, we first hear about Sabbath at the very beginning in the creation story in Genesis 2, which says, on the 6th day, God had completed all the work that he had done. And on the 7th day, God rested from the work that he had done. Right? The Hebrew word translated rested comes from the root word Shabbat, or in English, Sabbath. The word would then later become this word that means the 7th day of the week. But the original meaning wasn't just to rest, it meant to cease, to end what you were doing. So on that 7th day, God didn't just rest, but God ceased he stopped the activity of the other 6 days. The passage goes on to say, God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work of creation. Right? So first, right, God ceases, God stops. And then he sets the seventh day apart, making it holy. So the Hebrew word for holy is kadesh, and it means apartness or set apartness or separateness or sacredness. Now we often use holy to describe things, right? We describe the sanctuary as holy, or the altar as holy, or maybe a particular place as being holy. The first thing that God makes holy isn't an object. In fact, God is never said to make any object holy. But the first thing that God makes holy is the seventh day. The first thing in creation to be holy is time. We tend to focus on things and not really the realm of time in our lives. Right? We work on making things, manipulating things, earning things, acquiring things. But I think by setting the seventh day apart, God is saying that it's not about the objects in our lives, the things in our lives, but it's about being. We are to enjoy the time that we have been given. So after God sets apart time for stopping, and God blesses that time. So a blessing actually is like a gift from God. I was going to bring in this blanket that my mom made me today, and I forgot it. But, so if God gave us this gift to rest and set aside this time of resting, and yet our culture tells us a different story, doesn't it, right? It tells us that we should be doing 24/7. We're kind of fixated on being busy, right? And I think we have been made to believe that if we rest, if we're still, then we're lazy or slothful. Right? We don't honor or see rest as important. And for most of us, we can't even imagine saving a day apart for rest. So imagine an important gift that you were given. What if instead of cherishing that gift, you tossed it in the trash or didn't accept the gift at all? And I was going to bring in this blanket that my mom made for me when I was a kid, and it's a Smurfette blanket, if you remember the Smurfs. They actually have kind of come back around, so they've had Smurf movies since then, but they were Saturday morning cartoons back in the day when I was a kid, and my brother and I loved to watch the Smurfs every Saturday morning. And she painstakingly made this blanket, and I remember seeing afterwards that she had templated it off a folder that had a picture of Smurfette on it, and she had drawn all these lines on the folder so that there was a little box that represented every, is it a stitch when you knit? I don't know. Clearly not a knitter. But for every little stitch in the blanket, there was a little box so that she could count and know what color the string needed to be in that box to recreate it. And even as an adult, right, like 40 years later, I still have that blanket. I've kept it all this time because I cherish it. And yet, God has given us this gift of Sabbath, the very first gift that God gave us, the gift of rest. And instead of cherishing it and keeping it, we often just throw it away. God would emphasize the importance of keeping Sabbath again when he gave Moses the 10 Commandments, in which we are told to remember the Sabbath day, treat it as holy. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Do not do any work on it. Not you, your sons or your daughters, your male or female servants, your animals, or the immigrants who you live with. See, that's like how we always work, right? We're given a rule, and then we try to make excuses on how we can get around that rule, right? God's trying to cover all of God's bases here, right? Not anybody, right? Not even the animals, because the Lord made the heavens and earth, the sea, and everything that is in them in 6 days, but rested on the seventh day. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Right? Keeping the Sabbath is in the same category as honoring your mother and father, not committing adultery or stealing, and not murdering, right? Like, God puts Sabbath on the same level. Like, if there's 10 things he doesn't want us to do, right? One of them is not murdering, and one of them is to keep the Sabbath. But often we don't think that we can afford the time off, right? And we have all kinds of excuses, right? Our work schedules, our children's schedules, all the things that we do are so important. And if we didn't do them, I think we often think in our minds, deep down, that the world would end. I mean, most of us wouldn't say it, right? But I think most of us are prideful in a way that we believe that the things that we do that are so important that nobody else could do them, or if they didn't happen, that somehow there would be dire consequences. But God rested on the seventh day. God. But we think that the things that we do are too important to rest. We think that what we do is more important than what God does. Often we find that the persons who don't allow us to take a break it's really us. Right? We think that there are so many demands on us to do things. But the people around us actually, I think, are often giving us permission to stop. But it's really our own selves that don't give ourselves the permission to stop. Because we tell ourselves that everything will fall apart if I take the time to rest. Or what value is my life if I take a day off and everything doesn't come to an end? Then what's my worth or purpose? Or that if we rest, it just means that we're lazy or slothful, and we don't want to be seen in that way. Listen, our worth doesn't come from the things that we do. Our worth is found in God, who created us and who called us good. A God who didn't think that Sabbath meant that we were lazy, but who gifted it to us knowing that it was a necessity of life. Sometimes we treat Sabbath, we think, as rollover minutes, and I have to admit that I'm guilty of this. Like, right, instead of taking regular time off, taking one day off a week to rest, we think, well, if we just save up those days and take a week-long vacation in the summertime, it'll all even out. And I can attest that it doesn't really work that way. We were designed to rest, right? We can't do anything well if we don't take time to rest. God has given us a rhythm in our lives. 6 days to work, followed by 1 day of rest. And I have to tell you, rest isn't just physical rejuvenation. Aristotle said that we need relaxation because we cannot work continuously. Relaxation, then, is not an end. It is for the sake of activity. But our scriptures tell us a different story. The Sabbath isn't for the sake of the weekdays, so that we can work and toil more. Rather, the weekdays are for the Sabbath. We don't take Sabbath to enhance our efficiency at work. We work so we can enjoy the Sabbath time. Creation was complete after 6 days. But God does something important on that seventh day. God creates rest. Right? Rest is really part of God's creative process. It's much more than just refraining from work. Through rest, God created happiness and peace and harmony in which God intended us to live. And this is far beyond just sort of physical rejuvenation. It goes beyond a nap or a day off or what a vacation can achieve. It's an invitation to know God more fully and to grow closer to God. It's letting go of the things that have a hold on us, the struggles and trials, the aching disappointments, and unfulfilled longings to find ourselves in God. In our busyness, we often fail to know God's presence. We miss the nature of God, and instead our lives become consumed with things that don't bring us joy or peace. Psalm 46 tells us to be still and know that I'm God. But I think somehow we are a little bit afraid to be still, right? That we tend to busy ourselves to avoid that stillness, to avoid that connection with God and allowing ourselves to know God. I don't know if we're just afraid that in knowing God, we'll realize that maybe not everything in our lives is quite the way that it needs to be, and that we need to change. But it seems that in our society, right, like even when we're exhausted and we can't do one more thing, we flip on the television and watch just so that we can't be in the midst of that stillness and to hear God's small voice still talking to us. It is in the stillness and the stopping and the resting that we come to know God. And I want to say that it is not about legalism either, keeping the law that God commanded. And I know for many of you, you hear the 10 Commandments and it seems like the rule book, right? Like these are the rules that you have to follow. These are sort of a test. It's God trying to keep us in line. But God gave us those commandments out of love because God wanted the best for us. It's kind of the same as when parents give rules for their children, not because they want to be tyrants or mean, even though somehow that's how our children somehow take it. But they give those rules because they know it's the best for their children. They want them to live lives of joy and happiness and peace. And they know that in following those rules, that becomes a reality. Perhaps, I have a friend who grew up on the west side of the state as a Reformed church person, and her connotation of Sabbath was just that on Sunday, this day of Sabbath, she couldn't go outside and play. That was the rule. Like, you know, it was shameful to your family, apparently, when she was growing up on the west side of the state, if you were seen outside playing because it was the Sabbath and the day of rest. And so to her, Sabbath just meant that for some reason, God didn't want her to ride her bike on Sunday, right? Which made no sense to her. Why would God have something against bike riding one day out of the week? Right? It's not meant to be this legalistic rule that we have to follow. Maybe for others of you, you haven't really ever practiced Sabbath and you just feel a little bit indifferent about it. Yes, God rested on the seventh day. Yes, it's part of the 10 Commandments, but what does it really mean? What is its purpose? And does it really carry the same kind of weight as the other commandments, like not committing adultery or honoring your mother and father or not murdering? The Sabbath is essential. It is like food and water. In John, it says that God sent Jesus in the world to help us to participate, right, in these essential life-giving parts of life. It says, I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me will not be hungry, and he who believes in me will not be thirsty. And yet we are often tired because we don't take the time to rest and to come to God, who is our bread and who quenches our thirst. Sabbath is optional if we're going to live the life that God desires of us. So I'm going to say that without Sabbath, in many ways, our life, if you remember the parable of the soil, right, is like our soil is never left farrow, and we become hard and dry and spent. And we aren't able to live the life that God wants us to. Right? All those other things that we read about and think about in the Bible that seem to take precedent over Sabbath. Loving your neighbor, right? Feeding the poor, clothing the naked. None of those things can happen if we don't take time to rest and to listen and to hear God's call and to have clarity about our lives and how we use our time. So this week, I'm going to leave you hanging a little bit. Next week, we're going to sort of unravel a little bit more on what Sabbath looks like. What does it mean to take rest? How is it different than a nap or a day off or a vacation? How do we truly take the kind of Sabbath that God calls us to? This week, I invite you, though, to use the devotional guide that is in your newsletter. Each day, we're going to be kind of unraveling some of the myths that maybe you have about Sabbath, so that hopefully by next week you can put those aside and be ready to embark on a new journey of actually engaging in Sabbath in new ways. With that, I invite you to pray with me. God, we are tired. Our minds are frazzled, our hands are full, and our emotions are reeling with all the things we have to do. Help us to come to you in the middle of the overwhelming busyness of our lives. Remind us of your ever-present help in our times of need. Show us how to rest in you. Reveal in us both the beauty of work and of rest. Calm our anxious thoughts and encourage our hearts with your nearness. Instruct us in your ways. Bring productivity and contentment out of peace and the comfort we find. Settle us in your truth and in your love. Amen.